Hey, 42 here. Have you ever flown into Schiphol Airport in Amsterdam? Most Europeans will know it well since it's the third busiest airport in the region, after London Heathrow and Paris Charles de Gaulle. But what you might not know is that a famous naval battle once occurred on the very spot where your plane touched down. The Battle of Haarlemmermeer in 1573. That's right, this entire airport used to be completely underwater. In fact, a substantial portion of this rather clever country used to be underwater. 17% of the land you see on this map didn't exist 1,000 years ago. So, how, you may wonder, does a country simply magic up new land seemingly from nowhere? How do you battle the sea and win? And most remarkably of all, how did the Dutch achieve most of this using nothing but medieval technology over 800 years ago? Well, by the end of this video, you'll find out some very surprising truths about this remarkable nation that has always punched well above its weight. But first, I want to ask you a question. Who do you think invented ice skates? If you said Canada or Russia, you'd be wrong. Turns out, it was the Dutch. Well, maybe. It might actually have been the Swiss. Ice skates dating back to 3000 BC, made from animal bones, have been found in a Swiss lake. Oh, the Scottish also have a claim too, since they've been using skates to navigate their frozen rivers during winter for almost a millennium. But it can be argued that the Dutch made the first incarnation of the modern-day ice skate. In the 14th century, the Dutch created wooden platforms with iron blades on the bottom, and thus the art of spinning around like a total prat in public was born. But this dated Dutch design was no accident. Ever since people have lived on this small pocket of land, they've been fighting against the incessant intrusion of the sea. The Netherlands is the lowest country in Europe. It's not part of what's called the Low Countries for nothing. 26% of it is below sea level. And therefore the nation has always been pockmarked with waterways. These days a lot of them are artificial, shaped by centuries of engineering. But in the 14th century they were largely natural. And during winter these waterways would freeze over. So, like the crafty Scots, the Dutch created ice skates to navigate their towns and fields more efficiently. The Dutch relationship with the sea has always been a symbiotic one. It has provided the nation with some of the most fertile land in the world. They also used their familiarity with the sea to build one of the most formidable navies in history in the 17th century, which they used to conquer land all over the map and build the most valuable trading company in history, the Dutch East India Company. The Dutch and the sea may be watery friends today, but it wasn't always this way. Because on a dark day in 1219, this friend turned foe. A catastrophic flood swept across the Netherlands, called First St. Marcellus Flood. Yeah, there was another one. It killed 36,000 people and devastated entire communities. That's when they knew something had to change. You see, the North Sea has always had a personal vendetta against the Netherlands. As sea levels have swelled at various times in the past, huge areas of the country have been flooded. It's a story that just kept on repeating. The Dutch had two options: acquiesce and let their homeland rescind below the depths, perhaps retreating to higher ground, all 322 meters of it, or they could go to war. Obviously, the Dutch, being the Dutch, chose the latter. But this was a war they had no right to win. You don't just go to war with the goddamn sea and expect to win. Except, that's exactly what they did. And so, beginning in the late 12th and early 13th centuries, the Dutch fought the sea in their first skirmish. Their initial weapon of choice was the dike. Communities built huge embankments from sand and clay around their villages and farmlands. Next, they built dams to deal with smaller sea inlets and troublesome rivers. The result of their backbreaking efforts was nothing short of revolutionary. Instead of losing land to the sea, the Dutch started to reclaim it. As their dikes and dams routed the waves, land that was below sea level revealed itself once more. thus creating what are known as polders, new sections of land below sea level. Polders that were used for farming and even to build new communities on. Just think how incredulous it is that in the 13th century, humans defied the advance of the sea to uncover new land and build permanent settlements on it. And once the Dutch had defied the deluge of the sea, they even weaponized it for national defense. Enter the Dutch waterline, a series of water-based defenses conceived in the 17th century. By ingeniously manipulating the water levels around the country, the Dutch could deliberately inundate sections of land, creating impassable barriers for enemy troops. This was remarkably effective and used well into the 19th century, safeguarding their heartland behind a watery shield. Of course, maintaining these dykes and dams to ensure water didn't slip through required a huge public effort. So the Dutch created the waterschappen, local boards that were in charge of maintaining dykes, dams and waterways. The waterschappen even had the power to levy taxes on the local community to pay for these works. The waterschappen is one of the world's oldest collective democratic institutions, and it's still in operation to this day. In fact, water management is so entwined with Dutch history and culture that it forms the basis of their political system. Allow me to explain. Historically, Dutch politics had a cooperative philosophy underpinning it. Decisions and laws have always been made by first getting the opinions of everyone it affects, no matter how far down the social ladder they may be. This ethos even affects company culture. Before enacting new policies, companies will consult all the staff, even the person who cleans the toilets. There's a name for this system of values. It's called the polder model. It's named so because when deciding where and how dykes and windmills should be built, it has always been important to consult the local community and make sure that new infrastructure won't adversely affect any particular person or family or their farm. Unfortunately, however, the polder model is now falling out of favour in modern Dutch society, with decisions both political and corporate being made from the top down, as is typical in America. The dykes were a significant step forward, but occasionally they were breached. The sea would swell during storms and flood the polders, or heavy rainfall would fill them up. So, the Dutch built windmills, more windmills than you could shake a stroopwafel at. Whilst in most European countries windmills were used to grind grain, in the Netherlands they were designed to pump water out of polders. Lots of it. It's hard to overstate the importance of windmills to the Dutch. By the end of the 19th century, somewhere in the region of 9,000 had been built across the country, and they're still a common sight today with over 1,000 surviving examples. But come the 20th century, the job of the windmills was steadily replaced by steam-powered pumps, then diesel, and finally, electric. By the 20th century, the Dutch had achieved a lot, substantially more than any other nation before it in the world of water management. But they still yearned for more land, more agriculture, more tulips, more Dutch. They had spent the previous 600 years fighting local skirmishes with the sea, and their win rate was impressive. But each time they sued for peace, the sea would just retreat, muster its strength, and return with renewed ferocity. So, in a final death knell, the Dutch decided to dam harder than they'd ever dammed before. They designed a dam so damming it would doom the sea to eternal damnation. You see, the Dutch had always had this really annoying chunk missing from their country. The Zuiderzee was a natural shallow inlet bay, 30 miles wide and penetrating 60 miles into the heart of the Netherlands. The Zuiderzee has been the site of a few notable battles, most notably the Dutch defeated the Spanish here in 1573 at the Battle of the Zuiderzee. But it has also been the cause of many catastrophic floods over the centuries. And so, in 1927, the construction of the Afsluitdijk began. It would be, and still is, one of the most ambitious engineering projects in human history. The goal was to build a dam and causeway stretching 20 miles over this section of the Zuiderzee, cutting off a huge swathe of water from the Wadden Sea, and in the process connecting two ends of the country via a road. After its completion in 1932, the Afsluitdijk transformed the saltwater Zuiderzee into a new freshwater lake called IJsselmeer. For a long time it was the world's longest dike, only recently being edged out by the Saemongum seawall in South Korea, which is 1 mile longer. Within the new Lake Izhelmir, incredible things happened. Acting as a safe haven for wildlife, certain areas were designated as natural reserves. And huge new polders were created, such as Viringamir, Nordus polder, and others, collectively adding roughly 500,000 acres of fertile land to the country. That was the north under control, at least for the most part, but in the south of the country, things are about to go from not great to horrendous over the span of just 24 hours. On Saturday, the 31st of January 1953, a heavy storm surge caused the North Sea to flood huge parts of the Netherlands, Belgium, and the UK. In the Netherlands, 1,835 people were killed, 70,000 had to be evacuated, and 10,000 buildings were completely demolished. The British responded by building the rather impressive Thames Barrier, but this isn't a video about Britain. Over in the Netherlands, they took things one step further. They only completely reconfigured the landscape of their country. In fact, they looked at the entire coastline of the provinces of Zeeland and South Holland and went, so yeah, none of this is any good at all, let's just redo it all from scratch. And so, in 1954, the Dutch Parliament passed the Delta Law, which agreed to build the country's most ambitious project ever, the Delta Works. A series of dams, dykes, locks and levees that would completely change the dynamics and landscape of this substantial area forever, making the residents of Zeeland and South Holland considerably safer in the process. Initially, the newly established Delta Works Commission wanted the engineers to construct flood defences that would only fail due to a 1 in 125,000 year weather event, but that was found to be a completely unrealistic goal. So expectations were scaled back a bit to 1 in 10,000 years, which is still one hell of a flood defence system. To meet this target, a purpose-built flood simulation lab was built. Since this was the days before computer modelling, if you wanted to model something, you had to actually build a f***ing model. So that's exactly what they did. In the middle of a forest, utilising an existing stream to simulate the sea, they built the Waterloopbos, meaning Forest of the Streams. A series of scaled dykes, dams, sluices and other infrastructure constructed from concrete. And they planned well. Because after the full-size project was complete, not only was it successful in providing ample protection to millions of Dutch, the Delta Works was crowned the 7th wonder of the modern world. And it's a deserving title. There are quite a few individual components that comprise a Delta Works, and each one is perfectly planned, placed and put together. But most notable is the Oosterschelde, or in English, the Eastern Scheldt Storm Surge Barrier. It was the most expensive part of the Delta Works to build, and it took a decade. At 5.6 miles long, it's an absolutely behemoths structure, and a true engineering marvel. It contains no fewer than 62 steel doors, each 42 meters wide. But I also have to give a special mention to Meislethkering, consisting of two 210-meter long gates that can swing to close and shut out the sea. It's one of the largest moving structures on Earth, and it protects the main entrance to Europe's busiest port, Rotterdam. The barrier actually uses computer algorithms written in 500,000 lines of code to decide when to close and when to reopen. And if you travel just 5 miles inland from Meislethkering, you'll find another engineering marvel that requires a special mention. This is the Rosenberg Wind Wall. Built along the Kaland Canal, this incredibly busy port requires huge container ships to pass through a very narrow opening in a bridge that raises up. And since the Netherlands is flat, it can get extremely windy at this location. And that made it very challenging for huge container ships to thread themselves through this very narrow needle. So in typical Dutch fashion, they said, "Screw you, wind," and built a series of 125-meter tall concrete slabs to stop the actual wind. They'd already stopped the sea. I'm pretty sure if it was inconveniencing them, the Dutch would find a way to stop gravity as well. There's no damn doubt that all these damn dams and damn dykes have forever changed the damn Dutch. The creation of polders added huge tracts of arable land to the country. But this wasn't your normal farmland. These were polders, meaning they were below sea level, and that gave them a huge advantage. Their soil, enriched by centuries of aquatic sediment, was incredibly fertile, perfect for agriculture. And because of the extensive system of canals and ditches, irrigation was a breeze. Literally, at the flip of a switch or the turn of a valve, sufficient water can be supplied precisely where it's needed. This meant that crops grown on polder land were not just abundant, but they were also of higher quality. The impact of this reclaimed land on Dutch agriculture was nothing short of phenomenal. Let's take the dairy industry, for instance. The Netherlands, though a small country, is one of the world's largest exporters of dairy products, thanks to the lush, nutrient-rich grasses that grow in these polders. The cows here produce some of the highest yields of milk per animal in the world. The result is the beautifully creamy gouda that is exported worldwide. Did you know that gouda has been made in the Netherlands since 1184, making it the world's oldest category of cheese that is still made using the same recipe? By the way, have you ever seen that floating multi-story bicycle parking facility in Amsterdam? Well, what you might not know is that in Rotterdam there is also a floating dairy farm that is home to 32 cows. And then there's the vegetable industry. The Dutch are masters of greenhouse farming, a technology that pairs perfectly with the flat open spaces of the polders. They've turned their country into one of the world's largest exporters of vegetables. Tomatoes, cucumbers and bell peppers grown here can be found in almost every supermarket in almost every country in Europe and beyond. But the exports that the Dutch are best known for can only really be appreciated from above. Take a look at this drone footage of some French farmland. Now, here's a similar shot of Dutch farmland. Just look at those spectacular colours. This country is absolutely covered in tulip farms. The Netherlands produces 90% of the world's tulips. Throughout the Renaissance, the Netherlands grew wealthy from the export of tulips across Europe, since wealthy European aristocrats viewed tulips as a sign of wealth, and hence they bought them in great numbers. As demand outstripped supply, their price skyrocketed. At one point, a single tulip was worth more than a small house. The whole episode became known as Tulip Mania. It is considered by some economists to be the first market bubble in modern history, until, like all bubbles, it eventually popped in 1637 as the price of tulips fell off a cliff. Oh, wait, there aren't any cliffs in the Netherlands. And did you know it isn't just tulips that this country turns out in their thousands? 44% of the world's flowers are grown in the Netherlands, and 77% of all flower bulbs come from here. The Netherlands is basically the world's flower shop, and it's all thanks to the mineral-rich polders that the Dutch created all by themselves. The Dutch have truly been pioneers in the field of water management. So much so that today, Dutch engineers are routinely brought in to consult on water management projects in almost every other country. By turning what was once the sea into some of the most productive land on Earth, the Dutch didn't just reclaim land, they reclaimed their destiny, shaping their country into an agricultural titan, respected and admired the world over, and making the country a shit ton of money whilst they're at it. Well, damn. Thanks for watching. Just a quick word to say that I couldn't make these videos without the support of my Patreon members. Consider joining the exclusive 42 Discord community by supporting me on Patreon. It's a great place to discuss my videos with like-minded individuals and myself. The link's in the description, but if you don't want to, or you can't join my Patreon, then please don't worry. A simple like or comment to say thanks would also put a huge smile on my face. Thank you.